Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sara Abushaar, and I'm going to be your moderator for this morning's session. We meet at a critical juncture for our world on what is likely to be the generational issue of our time. The genocidal assault on Gaza, part of the ongoing Nakba, the litany of crimes against humanity committed against the Palestinian people for more than 75 years now. Already, the world before and the world after Gaza is forever changed. And we know historically, college campuses have always been a pivotal space where the paradigm-shifting battles of our world are fought out. And for this reason, countervailing forces of suppression, character assassination, misrepresentation are strong. We've seen just this past week the fascist crackdowns on conscience and the silencing of dissent, the criminalization of dissent on Columbia's campus. And while that's incredibly frustrating, it also speaks to the power of these spaces as places of change and as barometers of the future. And so our role, though we might perceive ourselves to be small relative to the scale of the atrocities before us, is not inconsequential. We're very privileged today to have with us someone who really needs no introduction. He's infamous for being asked to condemn himself at the start of every interview. But he's also someone who's played a pivotal role in flipping the script and rejecting the forced narrative imposed upon Palestinians, creating a much greater sense of conscience and context for the Palestinian cause that was grossly absent when the world erupted back in October. Please join me in welcoming His Excellency, the Ambassador of Palestine to the United Kingdom, formerly head of mission, the PLO to DC, Excellency Ambassador Husam Zomlot. Thank you for being here. Dr. Zomlot, I'll start with a question that's on all of our minds. 30,000 Palestinians slaughtered, 15,000 children, every possible record broken in terms of the number of journalists killed, medics killed, aid workers killed. We see testimony after testimony that this is the worst atrocity that people have borne witness to. The streets have shifted. The world has rallied behind the cause. We see unprecedented measures invoked by the UN. The ICJ rules plausible genocide, and yet it seems we're nowhere near the end. What more can be committed against the people of Gaza, and what will it take to stop this genocide?
Thank you, Sara, very much for the generous introduction, and the thanks are for our friends at Harvard, the Arab Conference at Harvard, Jamal and Hashim, and all the team for putting together such a very timely conversation. And I've been following the Harvard students and faculty actually in the last few days, and the demonstrations, the pickets, and all over the US, in Columbia, in Yale, and Ohio, and what have you. This is becoming a movement, and an overdue movement, but it's also the student body historically that starts the change for our globe. So this is an opportunity, Sara, to really commend our colleagues, our friends at Harvard and all over the US and the world. Answering your question, genocidal entities like Israel, entities that are built on ethnic cleansing, subjugation, oppression, occupation, colonization, besiegement, theft of land, apartheid, rely on few things. They rely on, number one, that attention would recede, would decline. And look now, the last 24 hours, you will have more than 40, 50, 60, 70, 90 Palestinians killed, hundreds injured, and it's no longer making headlines. Usually, attention received. They rely on that, number one. Number two, they rely on numbing, the feeling of numbing. Because when you see that 100 has been murdered, and you know that 100,000 were killed or maimed, then you have this numbing feeling. And therefore, and that's what Israel relies on, that down the line, this would become normalized, that down the line, this will not make headline, that down the line, this will not bring hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people to the street, that down the line, this will not create the outcry it is creating at the beginning. Now, this is the biggest fear, the biggest challenge, which we must face straight up, simply because what is happening now needs to transfer itself from an outpouring support and solidarity to a movement, and a movement requires organization, and organization requires clarity and vision and tools. And I think this is a moment when we think structurally, and the biggest and the most significant part of this thinking is how do we sustain this unprecedented energy worldwide. And the epicenter of it is Europe, actually, here in London, in the UK, but also in the US and elsewhere. How do we turn this into the South Africa apartheid, anti-apartheid movement moment? And remember, actually, the epicenter of that movement was also the UK, with great deal of activism in the US. And that movement, there are many lessons to learn from the anti-apartheid movement, how to rely when the top leadership fails humanity, like it does now for Palestine and Gaza. How do we rely on the power of the people, and how the power of the people can actually deliver, which happened in the case of South Africa, the freedom of Nelson Mandela, the end of apartheid, and the advent of democracy and freedom in South Africa. I believe this is a confliction point. I believe we have all the making for a movement that goes all the way for the liberation and return of the people of Palestine. And in fact, not just for Palestine, but for equality for all in today's very troubled world, Sarah.
Thank you, Excellency. At present, I mean, it's become blatantly clear to the world the injustice, the egregiousness of it, and the double standards that have long been known to Palestinians have become obvious to the rest of the world. You see the difference in the representations of Ukraine versus Palestine on the same war crimes. You see the difference in terms of the reactions to the murder of the 7 World Central Kitchen workers versus the 15,000 Palestinian children. You see the silencing of slogans for an end to genocide versus the sanctioning of an actual genocide. It's really become impossible to defend at this point. And yet, vested interests make it so that many still stick to the same party lines. In the words of Daniel Levy, you wonder, can you really keep a straight face when you say that? Behind closed doors, off camera, off mic, have you found that conversations have shifted with your counterparts in government and in media? Is there a rupture between the private and public discussions to a greater degree?
Oh, yes, absolutely, yes. Behind closed doors, everybody knows what is happening. No one, Sarah, no one can claim they didn't know. I mean, this is the first ever genocide that is being recorded in real time by both the entity, the ones that are committing genocide, Israel, and by the genocided people themselves. This is the first time people are filming their own execution in Gaza. And the heroism that came out of Gaza was also about capturing the atrocities, the crimes, the genocide that is committed against them, the mass murder, the mass destruction. And therefore, the images are flooding the world, and every single Western politician and every single international politician knows. So no one could claim to me during all these conversations that they didn't know. However, in the public, it's a different ball game altogether. Here comes the personal calculation. Our biggest issue with politicians is personal calculation. So far, until recently, being seen as pro-justice, pro-freedom, pro-international law, pro-Palestine will cost you political capital. It's as simple as that. You will pay a heavy price. You will be punished. On the other hand, being seen as pro-occupation, colonization, besiegement, apartheid would be rewarded. Now, this is an equation we need to change, Sarah. We have got to change. And the last few months, we have begun to see that change. Politicians everywhere realize that they might actually pay a price if they are on the wrong side of history. And we see these politicians everywhere, including the US. And I'm sure you're following the conversation, the discussion about the prospects of elections in the US vis-a-vis the discontent by voters about the way in which the current administration has handled the Gaza/Palestine situation. But the same situation here in the UK, in Europe, all over. So we have begun, finally, at last, the process of making these politicians realize that also, if you side with justice, you will be rewarded. And if you are on the wrong side of history, people will not like it, and they will deliver their verdict in the ballot box. But this needs more organization, this needs more sustainability, this needs institutions, this needs funding, and I hope this will follow, because otherwise demos and marches are very important. But without changing that dynamic, the situation will stay as it was for the last 76 years.
When it comes to, looking out for international laws or international institutions for our accountability, and for our liberation, there's a structural issue at play, right? You have the Genocide Convention of 1948 came into place in the very same year that Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from their land. You have institutions like the UN that we fought hard to have a seat on. These are the very same institutions that gave Palestine away, and the very same institutions that have greenlit an occupation for the past 56 years now. They've been designed to make it such that Palestinians' freedom is subject to the mercy of the occupier. So can we rely on these institutions that are in some way complicit, the institutions that enslave us, to set us free?
Well, the international order is incomplete. However, the problem is not in the law, not in international law. International law is very clear. International law does not give occupiers any rights. Go back to the Geneva Conventions. International law gives occupiers responsibilities, obligations, commitments. The most important is the protection of civilians under their occupation, and the provision of main services like education and health. International law is very clear that the right to self-defense is only enacted, only exercised when a state is attacked by a state, there is a state of war, two equal armies, and what have you. In our situation, occupiers do not have such a right. The problem is not in the law, nor even in the structures. I mean, okay, it could be better, but the structures, as in the Security Council that is there to prevent wars, that's the main mandate of the Security Council, that wars should never be the first option. Nor it is in the rules that we created after the horrors of the Second World War, the war rules, nor in the international judicial system that we also created should these rules of war be violated. That's why we have the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. It's for accountability. The problem, Sarah, is primarily in one word: commitment. Commitment by the superpower, so-called superpower, great powers, the commitment to applying international law equally. That's the issue. The issue is enforcement. And the issue is the US primarily. And you've seen what the US has done only a couple of days ago in the Security Council, blocking Palestine from becoming a member state in the UN, something that the US has no right to do. This is none of the business of the US to block the birthright, inalienable right of the Palestinian people for self-determination. And by the way, it was Woodrow Wilson, the US president, who started this international, universal premise that every nation, every people have the enshrined sacred right of self-determination. And therefore, the US is even going against its own history, its own principles, its own democracy, going out of its way to protect Israel. And at the same time, Israel is presenting the US with two options in the last couple of weeks. Either it drags the US into a regional war, i.e. Iran and all that, or it continues with the complicity of the US, the genocide in Gaza and the invasion of Rafah. What kind of, between parentheses, an ally, a small ally that is Israel, presenting the US with such options? And the only the only option the US has now vis-a-vis Israel is just to allow Israel to mass murder Palestinians, to spill more Palestinian blood. And the main conclusion of that is that the US and the rest of the West considers Palestinian blood, Palestinian lives to matter less, that we are the least costly of options for them. And that's why there are reports now that suggest that in exchange of a trade of Israel not hitting hard on Iran, they might be allowed to enter into Rafah. And you know, if Israel invades Rafah, what would be the consequences? It would be unseen, untold stories of murder and destruction. And the final answer for your question, the problem isn't that. It's in the commitment to equal application of international law. You know, I'll quote Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of Britain, who wrote a letter to the pro-Israel lobby here just during the time of us reverting Israel to the ICC, to the International Court of the International Criminal Court. And he wrote in that letter that Britain will not allow the Palestinians to access the court, and I'm paraphrasing here, primarily because Israel is an ally and a friend. Ally and a friend. What does that mean, sir? It means that international law does not apply on allies and friends. International law only applies on foes, and linking to your question about Ukraine and Russia and all that. And therefore, the last months, the last few years actually, have really exposed, unmasked beyond repair, the double standards, the selectivity, the hypocrisy of great powers such as the US. And this is a moment when we clinch into the rules, into the international order, but we make sure that our focus is on the commitment of these great powers for equal application of international law.
You touched on this to some degree as you started to speak about the decision of the Security Council earlier in this week to deny statehood, to the veto of the United States. As you look to the future, I know we're all focused on this genocidal period right now, but what is your vision for the future of Palestine, politically speaking, given the powers that be that are heavily kind of weighing on the scale? What are you most worried about in this post-genocidal period?
I am most worried about that the so-called, international community, the US-led international community, would want us to go back to the status quo ante. That's the biggest worry. That they want us to go back to the 6th of October. That we will just have to live under a permanent occupation, permanent colonization, permanent apartheid, permanent arrests of thousands of our civilians, of our children, without trial or charge, permanent walls and checkpoints, permanent besiegement of Gaza. This is what worries me the most. And therefore, we shall never, ever allow a return to the status quo ante. That's the key thing. We must move forward. And that's why the state of Palestine, together with its friends, Algeria and others, presented a different vision for the future. And the different vision is a vision where there is a state of Palestine on the occupied land of the state of Palestine, that is the West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza. That state is recognized by the world. That state has a full member in the UN. And that state is able to protect its people and is able to provide for its people. And that state then will negotiate minor issues. But the key issues are non-negotiable. The issue of our right to self-determination is non-negotiable. The issue of our refugees returning to their homes and properties is non-negotiable. What this state is capable of is negotiating modalities of implementing these principles, but these principles are non-negotiable. And that's why we presented the world with a different alternative to the current situation, to the current darkness, to the current carnage in every sense. We presented a vision. Number one, this vision is a vision whereby we tell everyone there is a different path. And we, as a state of Palestine, would commit to the international law, international legitimacy. And thirdly, it's within the international consensus, including the US, the two-state solution. However, the US, by its veto, has really proven, Sarah, to be disingenuous, double talk, buying time for Israel. That's it. And just giving us lip service about the two-state solution. If you believe in the two-state solution, last week was your historic opportunity to reaffirm that. But it doesn't look like the US really believes in any solution for that matter. It wants to continue supporting Israel for a perpetual, unending, ongoing ethnic cleansing, replacement of the Palestinian people, a slow genocide that has been taking place for 76 years. And let me finish by explaining how the US explained its vote. It says, you know, the recognition of Palestine would have to happen after negotiations between Israel and Palestine, you know, as an outcome of final agreement. Mind you, this has been happening for 30 years, and Israel and the current Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has been there for a long time, I mean, more than 14 years, has been bragging publicly, saying that his biggest achievement is blocking a Palestinian state. So who are we going to negotiate with? With genocidal Israel? With a country that is committing genocide? With a government that has Netanyahu and Ben Gvir and Smotrich that are publicly calling for the erasure of the Palestinian people? And also, was Israel negotiated when it was established? Or was it Great Britain that promised our land without consulting us and turned us, the original native population who have lived for millennia on our land in Palestine, who are the, you know, the hub between East and West, the cradle of civilizations? Sarah, Palestine is the birthplace of Christianity, sacred to all religions. And they have turned us in that Balfour Declaration of colonial Britain, that colonial arrogance, they turned us, that was already 1917, into a non-Jewish minorities, i.e. they defined us of and by what we are not but by what we are. And I'm saying all this to say that this logic continues. Israel was not established by negotiations. Countries and rights of self-determination are not established by negotiations, especially when the other side has this asymmetrical power relations, has this supremacy ideology, has managed to create a situation whereby the vast majority of the West is supporting it. Negotiations will not result in any real outcome. It would be an international decision in the UN, and the US again and again and again fails the test.
So that's on the external front. And now if we move to the internal front, you know, you just spoke to how the international community has to impose this, as opposed to this being the product of a negotiation, because fundamentally this is an entity that is predicated on elimination. When it comes to looking within ourselves, you know, the entire world now is rallying behind the Palestinian cause as a just and moral cause and a cause of human freedom. And freedom has to come of this because the cost that Palestinians paid has been incredibly high. But that, of course, is contingent on national unity. And for decades, the occupation has worked to fragment and fracture Palestinians by design, to thwart that prospect of statehood. What are the prospects of unifying under a national front? It comes as no surprise to you, of course, that many view the PA as being part of the challenge. What are the prospects of serious evolution and leadership change? Why not take bolder steps now in this unprecedented moment?
Well, you're right, Sarah. Unity is key to any nation, let alone a nation that is undergoing genocide and seeking liberation and freedom, emancipation. I mean, you need to be united to do so. And you're right in quoting accurate events that Netanyahu has been adamant of feeding the division for the very simple rule, divide and rule. And he's been very public about it in the Knesset, saying that the best way to prevent the emergence of a Palestinian state is A, by the use of sheer violence, as you may have been following for years, not just the last 6 months. B, by creating a division among Palestinians, and C, by adopting the so-called outside-in approach. The outside-in approach means that he makes peace with other countries, but not Palestine and not Palestinians. That's why you have the normalization in the last 4 years or so, the Abraham Accords and what have you, Emirates, Bahrain. It's the logic of Netanyahu that peace is made between non-warring, non-conflicting, when he knows very well that his issue, Israel's issue, is us, is the millions of Palestinians under their occupation and subjugation. It is, in a way, wanting to make us the biggest elephant in the room and wanting to bypass the Palestinian issue. So understanding all these dynamics and his strategy would inform our counter strategy, and one of which is unity. Now, unity comes in many forms, but the best form of unity is elections. It's democracy. The best form of unity is the people decide. Our people, they are the source of all legitimacies. All legitimacies. There is no other source. And while we have been at it for some time to try and bring all Palestinian factions together, and relentlessly so, efforts did not yield or throw it any desired results until now. And if you have time, we can go through it. But I believe the best way to do so is in the nearest opportunity possible, earliest opportunity possible, to offer this very question of unity, of agreements, of disagreements. How do we agree to disagree, which is very important? How do we build a common national strategy that we all agree on? We leave all that to the Palestinian people. They have to decide, and that can only happen through a democratic process. And that happens only if this democratic process is national, that includes Gaza, Jerusalem, and the West Bank, and also includes almost half, if not more than half, of our people who live in the diaspora and the exile and the refugee camps. Now, this is where our efforts are, to seize the moment, to seize the energy, and to offer our people the opportunity to choose their leadership and to renew their national structures.
I'm going to open it up shortly to the audience for questions. But before that, perhaps two more. One is, watching this Nakba has been a crushing experience and a trauma for many millions. Palestinians have faced the world and its oppression largely on their own for more than 75 years. You're a child of the Nakba, and you were raised in a refugee camp in Rafah. How did Palestinians survive this as a people for as long as they have? And not just survive, but continue to build through the destruction of life? And what lessons do we take from that as we kind of navigate the current Nakba that we're in?
That's a very important question, Sarah, really, very crucial, because as much as we should expose Israel's ugliness as being genocidal, and you know, for a country to become genocidal, it takes a long time. People think that that happened just over the last 6 months. No, that it's been brewing for a long time. The indoctrination, the racism, the sheer racism, the supremacy, the culture of impunity has led Israel to become genocidal. But as much as we want to expose that, and we must expose that, we must talk about our society, our people. So this is the right question. And how did we manage to survive, to steadfast, to remain, to recover all the time? Because this is not the first time. I think there are many reasons, many factors, but one of which is love, Sarah. I would choose this word, love. There is so much love in this society, so much love by our parents and grandparents for me and my generation as the first sort of generation of the Nakba. They shielded us from what happened to them. They insulated us, and they invested every little they had. And remember, they were literally ethnically cleansed from their homes and farms and businesses. They had nothing, if any, at all. And the way they turned us into their biggest investment and hope is based on love. And I can only remember love in the refugee camp of Rafah, Shabur. I can only remember, as if one mother is not enough. I had 20 mothers, Sarah, around me. I remember the sheer investment. I remember my grandmother who passed, Allah yarhamha. I remember her name was Hassan, and she had sold much of her gold just a couple of weeks after the Nakba to buy another piece of land next to her original piece of land, because she was absolutely certain she will go back. So she found a deal with her neighbor while they were actually ethnically cleansed, because they were certain this will be, matter of weeks before they go back to their lives. But then she learned the lesson, and the only time my grandmother sold whatever left of her gold, because remember, traditionally, Palestinian women is our sort of saving accounts. They keep the gold, they keep the savings. The only time she sold her gold is when I went to Birzeit University. So that tells you about the collective memory of Palestinians. And I think Hassan, my grandmother, represents all of our grandmothers. They realized that the best they could do is to invest in the human capital. And that's why you have the Palestinians, despite the most adverse circumstances a human being or a nation can ever go through for a long period of time, a century, despite all that, still Palestinians producing one of the lowest illiteracy rates in the world, one of the highest PhD graduates in the world, and still producing. I as an ambassador, my proudest moment, Sarah, is when I encounter people like you everywhere, and when I encounter Palestinians in the US, in Europe, in the UK here, who are a pride to any nation. I mean, Palestinians now run everything. I encounter hundreds of Palestinian doctors in the most senior medical positions in the UK here. I encounter inventors, poets, scientists, what have you, filmmakers. This is a nation that has produced generations, and I think the base of that is love, but also its roots, its culture. What unites us is not just political. Important it is, crucial it is, but cultural. Our culture, our history, our heritage is so vivid, is so rooted, is so historic, is so ancient, from our tatreez embroidery to our kufiya. You know, now the Palestine kufiya and the Palestine flag has become a global symbol. It's not just Palestinian, by the way, because our culture has fed into us our ability, our cuisine, which connects us all over the world. I'm sure many of your friends here have eaten a nice makluba at one point in their life. So culture is important, roots, history. So we were born as the first generation of the Nakba, but we were very rooted. We were fed by our mothers and grandmothers, by our parents and grandparents. We were fed, almost milk-fed, if I can use that term, our heritage and our culture. So roots is very important. Thirdly, we have managed to not be only victims, but active victims, struggling for our rights. And we built a national movement that shocked the world, the 60s and the 70s. And we told everybody that we will fight for our rights. We will not sit there as sitting ducks being murdered by this murderous regime of Israel. And therefore, the combination of this, including the national movement, have allowed us and enabled us to sustain. And the one most important thing is, while we do have some divisions between factions, the Palestinian people are not divided, Sarah. And read my lips here. The Palestinian people are united because of the roots, because of the culture, because of our destiny, because of our objectives that has consensus. So we are united as a nation. And I can give you many examples of our unity. Also, we have one address. Okay, we differ. There are differences, but there is one address. That's the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization. Now, the PLO needs to be reformed. We need democratization. Absolutely. Absolutely. But the PLO is the sole legitimate political, national, and emotional address for the Palestinian people. Here, where I'm sitting right now, it's the PLO office, the PLO mission to the UK. Where I was sitting in Washington as an ambassador, I was heading the PLO mission in Washington. So the PLO is the home of the Palestinian people, inside and outside. So all these factors, and by the way, why I'm mentioning that we have one address and one flag, because the people, the nations that have failed to create one address vanished. We didn't. We do have an address. We need to fix that address and make sure that it continues to represent all Palestinians. So there are many reasons. Sorry, I took my time in this, but there are many reasons. But love is number one. I love my people, and I believe I represent all Palestinians, the 14 million Palestinians. And I believe that the love we have taken from our community, from our people, have allowed us to get where we are today and continue the journey until we reach our final destination.
Thank you. Very, very heartfelt. Thank you so much for that. And I guess as a final question to you, Ambassador, it seems that what it will take to free Palestine will quite literally change the world. There are so many collateralized systems of oppression that Palestine is the linchpin of, the final nail in the coffin of US imperialism. The fight is a long and tough one, and a lot of the students here in the room today are people who are at the front line of that fight here in America. Now, the systems that they're up against are vast and very powerful. It can feel sometimes like it's a David and Goliath type battle. You're someone who's been at this for some time now. What would you say to them, and what message would you leave them with?
Well, the message is very clear. I mean, Palestine has become the global fault line, if you may, and also the global sort of identity, because people now are defining themselves not just, being pro-Palestine, just being pro-humanity, pro-decency, pro-justice, pro-peace. So Palestine has become the key issue. We used to say it's the core issue of the Middle East, of the Arab region. It's now the core issue of the globe. thanks to the activism and thanks to all that has been happening. And things are being exposed, Sarah. Really, I mean, Israel presenting itself as a victim. This is the first time in human history that I coined it recently, the occupier victim mentality, whereby they present themselves as the permanent victim all the time. And that's why how you started your introduction, that we have to condemn ourselves all the time because they are blameless. They are simply blameless after the ethnic cleansing of 2/3 of our people in 1948, all the way to the genocide of Gaza as we speak, and what they are doing in the West Bank. Let us remember, what they are doing in the West Bank is not less murderous. Only yesterday, they killed 14 young kids in Tulkarem. And therefore, I'm saying all, and by the way, they blame us for everything. This is a mentality, the occupier victim mentality. We are to be blamed for their occupation, literally, by the way. So they blame us for occupying us, they blame us for colonizing us and stealing our land, they blame us for besieging us, they even blame us for murdering us, Sarah. Within this whole thing, I think liberating Palestine and liberating, because Israel is corrupting everything. It's corrupting our humanity. It's corrupting the US. It's corrupting our international system. It is corrupting our international system. And therefore, liberating Palestine is going to be a liberation for our global order. It's going to be a liberation for the US. It will be a liberation for the US, because for too long, I think the US has been, in a way, its interest, its strategy, which is declared, its strategy is in creating some sort of peace and stability in the Middle East and in the globe in general, has been hijacked by the few. Therefore, yes, Palestine is the core of issues. And around Palestine, only yesterday I had a talk and I said, we need to go much more, because the movement around Palestine is about more, not just Palestine. It's about our humanity. It's about the kind of future we want to leave to our children. It's about our aspirations and universal values. And these values are not Western values or Eastern values or South or North. These are universal values. It belongs to all of us. The values of freedom, the values of justice, the values of equality, that all human beings are equal under the law. This is the premise. This is the premise of every and each civilization. We are equal. And the premise of every religion, by the way. And that's why this is not a religious conflict, Sarah. So what I'm saying is, yes, I feel as Palestinian that my struggle, our struggle, is a global struggle. And the moment I get to my freedom, and the moment we get to our rights and achieve our rights, is a moment when the globe will feel it. And this reminds me of Nelson Mandela, what he said just after he was released, that South Africa's freedom is incomplete without Palestine's freedom.
We'll open it up for 2 or 3 questions. Is that fine, guys? Time-wise?
Good afternoon. My name is Ghaith Musmar, Ambassador. Really pleasure to always hear you, especially live. And really, you made a couple of comments I wanted just to highlight. You talked about how people in power are disconnected with their own people, whether we see it in the United States with our lovely president, whether you see it with Netanyahu, but we also have to look at ourselves in the mirror. And you look at the Palestinian Authority, we also have a completely disconnected leadership. The Palestinian Authority has usurped the PLO. Your PLO is supposed to be the overriding entity that created the Palestinian Authority. But the Palestinian Authority, and let's be honest, is corrupt. It doesn't even represent us. I come from Nablus. I can't tell you how many times we've been attacked by the Israelis, by the settlers. And the second they come, the police go away. Our police go away. Our own government doesn't come to funerals when people get killed. The entire process of us saying we want to be liberated is being completely handicapped by those individuals that keep on saying that they want to fight for our rights. I know that you're one of those individuals who definitely wants to fight for our rights, but I really ask you to have a mission, and that mission is to speak to our lovely leadership at the Palestinian Authority to tell them they are just like the story of the black and red and white bull. If you guys don't know this Arabic story, it's very simple. There's 3 bulls. A lion convinces one of the bulls to not help the other bull. And long story short, they all get eaten by the lion. The Palestinian Authority somehow thinks that if it sits in its little cocoon in Ramallah, that they're somehow going to be exempted from this Israeli juggernaut that's going to go through and basically wave through all of our lands. I need you to consider getting these leaders that have been completely expired, as far as I'm concerned, to understand that we as the Palestinians that are living in America, we don't believe in them. They don't support us. They don't represent the people there or here. And they really need to wake up and understand this is the opportunity for us to get our freedom, but they're really the handicap that we are having to live with every single day. That's all.
Well, I answer one by one, Sarah.
You could start by answering the first, and if we can keep questions shorter going forward, just so that we can get through more.
Should I take Kabil?
One more? On this side, perhaps. Yes, let's take one more.
Hello, Ambassador. Thank you for speaking to us today. I'm Leen Danat from Jordan, but all my life I felt Palestinian, growing up and being born in Jordan. And my question to you is, I'm part of an extremely pivotal point in politics right now. I go to Columbia University in the city of New York, and you might have heard all of the attention and the situation that's happening there. And I was in the US when Trump got elected and was in a very similar political situation, and now here when all of the events in Gaza are happening. And what we see is that speaking up is only going to hurt individual careers. My question to you is, what advice do you have to students like me who are in the heart of the situation where we have the power to really make a change amidst a community that is extremely stubborn, but we have that space, but that space could really come back at us in a negative situation, in a negative way, that could hurt personal careers. Except that, you know, the Jordanians and the Palestinians and the Arabs stand together, and they've been extremely stubborn in their persistence, and they're still out there and they're sacrificing their careers. So my question to you is, you know, what's that piece of advice that you have? Because they are keeping going, but it's getting to a degree where it's, you know, impacting their careers and impacting their personal lives. They're still willing to do it anyway, but we want to hear your thoughts.
Guys, can we take one more, or you're adamant that we have to cut? Last one. Just one more, and then we're kind of near on time because they need to come into the room, the next batch.
A lot of pressure. Okay, marhaban. Thank you so much, man. Remarks were fantastic. You mentioned talking and seeing prominent Palestinians all over the world doing a bunch of different really cool things. You have a room full of very prominent, powerful, educated individuals who are all very obviously supporting Palestine. Give us some action. You are obviously much closer to the ground than we are. You talk about how united we are. I think the community here wants to be more united to the people on the ground. Like, what can we tangibly do to help support Palestine? I think we're all trying to donate and and be activists, but it feels like it's not enough. So anything you can suggest for us to actually have some sort of tangible impact on the facts on the ground would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Gaith. I hear you. I feel your pain and your hurt. We are all hurt, and we are all following what is happening in Nablus, in Jenin, in Tulkarem, as I mentioned earlier, 14 of our kids slaughtered only yesterday. We follow the rampage by the settler terrorist militias, supported and sponsored fully by the Israeli army. And we know the hurt felt, and we live it by our people in the West Bank and in Jerusalem. And I don't need to tell you the hurt by our people in Gaza. And I understand that you as Palestinian at Harvard want to see more action. The issue is, how do we discuss what kind of action? How do we advance our liberation, the struggle that has been lasting for 100 years? Let us not forget, this is not just the last 6 months. I mean, the Palestinian people have been at it for 100 years. From 1919, the first revolution, to the 1936, the Great Strike. Our history has been a continued history of struggle and a continued history of ethnic cleansing by Israel. just to zoom out a little bit and to make sure that we understand it as a people's struggle. And that's why I said the people are the one who have legitimacy, not anyone else. Our people, they have been at it, and we should not reduce our people to this moment or that moment. So, as I said, I really do believe that our people should decide on these matters, and I do believe that the best way forward is national elections. And we were supposed to convene such elections a couple of years ago, 2 years ago. Well, Israel prevented us in Jerusalem. There were other factors, but we should recommit to convening elections. So you, Raif, and people like you can really decide, but decide in a democratic way where we will respect our unity and we respect our differences. Elect in a way that really make us a nation that is capable to present our ambitions, our dreams, our rights in a united matter, but we can differ in political spheres. And I'm saying this because there is no other solution. I mean, just to have Fatah and Hamas sit together in a room and to end the division has been tried for a long time. And it seems that the gap is huge and the gap is significant. And to think that the solution will come from the top only is not going to solve much. We need a solution that comes from the masses, from the people, that really in the end deliver their verdict. But the last thing, Raif, before I go to the next question, of course we are imperfect, and we have issues with leadership for 100 years now. 100 years we have been divided. This is not the first time, by the way. Let me be frank and brutally frank with myself and with you. From the Nashashibi and the Husseini time of more than 70 years ago, all the way to today, we haven't been in the political sense, not national, not cultural, not as a people. We have had family feuds, factional feuds, but as a leadership and as a movement, we have been set and clear. At least for the last 35 years, we've been clear. We have allied ourselves with international consensus, if you may, with international legality. Imperfect it is, we have. And we have applied so many strategies of achieving our rights. I mean, you remember the 80s and you remember even the 60s. It was the PLO that started the whole idea of armed resistance. We also applied several, and you remember Yasser Arafat and the besiegement of Yasser Arafat and the murder of Yasser Arafat live in front of the camera. That was 2004. I'm saying all this because there is an Israeli logic in their way of managing a perpetual permanent occupation, a logic that the Palestinians are to be blamed for not attaining their rights. And I'm not saying you are saying that, but I just want to make sure that you also challenge this when it comes your way, because they say the Palestinians for 100 years have been mismanaged, corrupted, not representative, and have wishful thinking. They go for the maximalist. They never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. All are lies. All are lies. As simple as that. We are managed. We have institutions. According to the highest standards of international sort of institutions, we can oversee a state tomorrow. We are ready for that. While other nations do not have one address, we have one address. Yes, I agree that address needs to be more representative, but we do have that address. So I urge you not to throw the baby with the bathwater. If we lose our central representation, if we lose our legitimate address, it will take us generations to build it back. However, it is absolutely legitimate that we make sure that that address is representative of the people. The question about Linda, yes, of course, Jordan, Palestine, the Arab world, we are all Palestinians at this point, and we're all Jordanians. I appreciate your question and your passion. About career, Palestine has become, and not just the last 6 months, I have to say, it's been growing for the last so many years. Remember Sheikh Jarrah, 2021? I mean, this has been growing and building and accumulating for some time now. This isn't just the last 6 months, but Palestine has become such an attractive cause for your generation and even older generations. really attractive. And I see it wherever I go. We have become the mainstream. And our narrative is really now, our story, our discourse is really dominant. And look at the Israeli spokespeople, look at their discourse. It's been challenged, unpacked, in fact, destroyed, because it's a pack of lies. And you can fool some people for some time, and you can fool all people for some time, but you cannot fool all people for all the time. You know the saying. I'm sure I've said it wrong, but you get the gist of it. Now, about the career and about how do you protect yourself? Well, I've known many who in the last few months have really made a big career because they were pro-Palestine, because the numbers now protect all of us. And I don't have any advice for you except being human and being pro-justice, pro-law and international law, understanding that what you call for is for the equal application of values on everybody. And I don't think this should affect your career. And should it affect your career, we should fight for it. And should you be in a place that doesn't accept you to be universal in your beliefs, Linda, I don't think you should be in that place altogether. Don't join these institutions. Don't join these companies. And I tell you, there is enough money. There is huge amount of companies and money and enterprises and businesses now who would accept you for who you are if you present the best of our humanity. And I want you to protect yourself, to make sure what you say is always within these contours, but don't give in, and don't allow anybody to blackmail you when it comes to your values. As for our friend, give us action. Who am I? You didn't mention your name. Who am I to give you action? You're doing the action. I was so inspired in the last few days only when I saw all over the US sit-ins or sits-in, when I saw the pickets and the camps in Yale, in Harvard, in Colombia. Okay, police came, but I saw in other campuses students were carrying their tents and walking around just to disallow the police to do any action because they're not stationed. What a genius way of doing actions and of making sure you are within the law, the rule of law. I mean, genius. You're doing it. You're doing it. I mean, this is the first time in a long time, since 1968, since the civil rights movement, that the US campuses are on fire in the positive sense, that the campuses are really seeing such action, that the American student body is delivering their verdict. And do not underestimate this, my friend. This is huge. This is big, because the agents of change, either the older generation, i.e. the establishment, i.e. top down, the leaders, the structures we have, or it is your generation. There are no third alternative. It's either the top or the people. And the people are making the change because the top are not listening. But my one advice is, this has got to learn a lot from the anti-apartheid movement. It has got to learn from the ANC, because the one thing that has brought the apartheid regime in South Africa down, the situation that ended the injustice and freed South Africans, is sanctions. Sanctions. What ended this was the world, the people of the world, sucking oxygen out of the apartheid regime, literally. Literally, economic oxygen, cultural oxygen, everything. That regime was isolated, and Israel is a rogue state. Israel is a rogue state. You think genocide happened only in the last few months? Israel is a rogue state, and it must be isolated, so the public in Israel realize they must elect different leadership. And sanctions, the list of sanctions are very well known, starting with arms embargo, but they must ban all illegal products from arriving to the US or the UK or Europe. They must ban settlers, illegal settlers, from arriving, because visa waiver does not cover somebody who is committing a war crime, who's living illegally, extraterritorially in an occupied territory. The sanctions should include divestment, should include companies that profit from the occupation, etc. And accountability, number two, after sanctions. And those are two different things. We need to press so hard to make sure that those who committed war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. The International Court of Justice tells you now it is plausible that Israel is committing genocide and has placed Israel officially on trial for genocide. Accountability is key. We must issue arrest warrants. We must issue, we must bring these war criminals behind bars, not just to serve justice to the victims, which is crucial, important, but it's a deterrence. We want to make sure that this is not going to happen again. We want to make sure that this is our never again moment. And the only way to do so is by accountability, is by making sure that those who did these awful crimes, all the way from the politicians in Israel to the army, all the line of command, are brought to justice. And we need to push these international organizations like the ICC and the ICJ to do their business, to do their work, to bring these people behind bars, like happened in other situations. But should the world fail, we have to think about other means for accountability, maybe people's accountability. Maybe we set up courts you know, all over the world by people. But accountability is absolutely key. The third is recognition. It's important that we push in terms of our action for the recognition of Palestine, the state of Palestine, and the people of Palestine. Why I'm saying this, my friend? Because the essence of the Palestinian cause started outside, started in London, by the way, where I'm sitting right now. Started here. The essence of it is the cancellation of the Palestinian people. Remember, I started by saying earlier, responding to a question, that the Balfour Declaration canceled us as a people. They defined us as non-Jewish. So we were canceled. By the way, that was 1917. I was the ambassador in 2017 when Trump was in office, and I was in Washington, and the Trump ultimate deal, 100 years, exactly 100 years later, presented us with a plan. He coined it, you know, he likes big things. He coined it, Trump, the ultimate deal. The ultimate deal was reheating, recycling the Balfour Declaration, which is canceling Palestinian peoplehood, nationhood. He canceled us. Trump canceled us. Balfour canceled us. That's why we go to the Security Council for recognition of the state, recognition of the self-determination, recognition of the people. So do not underestimate the importance of global international recognition. And Israel was created by that. Israel was created by a UN General Assembly resolution, the partition plan, 1947. And in fact, it was the UN who gave Israel the birth certificate. And look what Israel is doing now to the UN. Since Israel's exception, Israel has been in ode with the United Nations, with the Charter of the UN, with the essence of the UN. And of late, Israel has been at the go of the UN, not just UNRWA and defunding UNRWA and claiming all these unsubstantiated claims against UNRWA, but it has been after the UN Secretary General, you know, been after the UN in general. And that's why at this moment, at this point in time, we have got to think clearly about the recognition and how do we advance the recognition as a way to correct the history and advance towards the future. In the meantime, we have got to focus on ceasefire. So long as this continues, we cannot think of anything else. We cannot think of how do we begin the remedy of the humanitarian catastrophe, the rebuilding of Gaza. And we have got to think about creative ways to do so and to push for a reconstruction and rebuilding that will bring Gaza back in the shortest period of time. Because our biggest threat is what Israel is planning for, which is the mass expulsion of our people. That's why they have sent 85% of the population in Gaza in Rafah, where I was born, the most southern part of Gaza, in preparation for the final push, the final solution, if you may, outside the homeland. And therefore, we want to make sure that this doesn't happen, and the best way to do so is an immediate and permanent ceasefire, and a parallel and immediate, and maybe we should have started yesterday, of providing massive humanitarian assistance and reconstruction projects. So this is, if you may, the skeleton of what I think our action should be.
Tall order. Let's get to work, guys. Thank you so much, Ambassador. Grateful to have you. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you very much for your time, Ambassador. All right, we have the next session starting now, I guess.